He put links back to his website that were ostensibly qualifiers for what he said, or explanations, which was really more like a sales funnel, it looked like to me. You know, get people on my website.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
So, you know, there's we'll have you know, plenty to talk about, and open to any suggestions that you would have, Sam. But I have I know that you're a really big fan of Sam Harris, and I don't think that I've seen you react to any of the clips that have or to any clips that have come out from his recent interview on trigonometry. That's another show that I know that you're a really big fan of, right?
I didn't see any of his comments. I think we saw one from Eric Weinstein, but I didn't see any of Sam Harris's. Are you going to show me some? Because
I am. I have one clip from Sam Harris that we have. That don't we have a scene of that, Adam?
Well, let me find out.
And it's I think that you're going to enjoy it because he talks about he is asked. Basically, because Sam, I think that Sam Harris, I think that, you know, has recently taken umbrage to some people that he used to be friendly with for their behavior over the pandemic, and so he has right. kind of refrained from talking to them, particularly Brett Weinstein, and his reasoning for not doing that anymore, I found absolutely fascinating.
Sam Harris made his first entree into politics. You know, he was a meditation guru, if you were, and he made his first foray into politics in the wake of 9/11 and the war on terror, and really sort of established himself by writing on Huffington Post in defense of torture, I think was literally what he titled the piece.
Yes.
And, you know, ostensibly he was a new atheist, but the more he sort of like opined, you start to realize he's really just a new Islamophobe. And he would deliver, oddly, you know, a lot of speeches. His first early tours were literally at Brotherhood rooms in synagogues. I don't know if synagogues have those type of things anymore. Sisterhood and brotherhood, that was like a thing back in the day. And that's where he would tour. And it was really just a way to go in there and sort of milk and justify the war on terror. And his whole premise was that there's something intrinsic in Islam and Muslims that makes them bad and creating this war, this clash of civilizations. And without having seen the piece that you've got, I'm going to guess that the thing that brings him together with some of his fellow travelers, as it were, is a shared belief that we're in, you know, the next chapter of this clash of civilizations, and therefore we must sort of like regroup as white non-Muslims. But that's just a guess, and I could be wrong, but I guess we'll find out. In the meantime, go ahead, Jacob. I just needed to plant my flag there.
Yeah, well, that exposition was very prescient. So I wanted to show you and see if you had any thoughts on that. Adam, do you see that clip?
I'll Fight You Naked says, you have recently made the decision not to speak to some people who disagree with you. Why is that?
I'm not sure who he might be thinking of. I mean, so there are people who I would not be inclined to talk to.
I think Brett is one of them. Let's break that
because they disagree with me, but because I think they've behaved unethically. It's like there's no that if you're thinking of your brother, that's conflating two things. There are topics. There are topics that I think it was irresponsible to debate
via podcast.
Certainly in the middle of a public health emergency, right? And certain styles of conversation, certain participants that I thought was just never going to converge on a useful document to export to millions of people. So I felt it was irresponsible to have certain conversations certain ways during the pandemic.
Well, it just seems like they were talking about who Sam Harris wouldn't debate, and he was talking about, maybe Brett Weinstein and others who were COVID denialists, and he didn't want to engage in that. I don't know if there was any, if he was thinking in the back of his mind of me, who he thinks is a psychopath. I think he called me. Or said I was behaving psychopathically or something to that effect. But I think he was really talking about the alienation he had from some of the other IDW folks over COVID and COVID policies.
I just thought that it was the parallel of the issues that you had with him during the, his defense of torture, and his issues that he was talking about Brett Weinstein about COVID, certain conversations happening at certain times in certain ways with certain people didn't feel like they were appropriate, even if in isolation or in certain other contexts they might be okay. That's exactly the thing that he 100%. Called you a psycho.
That was very astute. I mean, I think I found it impossible to believe that in 2004 you could claim, when you're writing a piece called In Defense of Torture, and he goes through this thought experiment where, what if somebody was, I think it was, if there was a bomb, or it was, a girl down a well,
right,
and that had been put there by a criminal mastermind or something. How would you say it's unethical to torture that person if it saves the girl? I can't remember the example. And aside from, I think, that being a piss poor thought experiment, and one that he never really fully developed, which I'll speak to in a moment. Well, I will say it's piss poor because you are looking at that one event in isolation and not looking at what it does to the systems that are involved there. The reason why you don't torture, even if you somehow had the notion that it was going to solve a crime in a circumstances, is that you are now giving license to more torture in scenarios where it inevitably will not solve the crime. And in fact, what becomes the standard of when you're allowed to torture, under what circumstances? You don't know if there's really a bomb, a nuclear bomb that's going to go off. And you're going to do that every time? You're going to allow police and whatever it is, other interrogators to say this? So the thought experiment itself was a disaster, in my opinion. But you, as a public intellectual, which he claims to be, to think it's responsible in the midst of a huge debate on the validity of torture that was taking place in 2004 because of torture that happened in Iraq.
As a left-wing liberal, supposedly, right?
Supposedly as a liberal. And there was no evidence that the torture they did actually produced any evidence or anything that helped thwart a terrorist attack or solve the terrorist attack or any of that. It was not, and in fact, to the opposite. You still have people in Guantanamo. You can't even try for certain things because they were tortured. To do that is, and claim like, I'm just doing a thought experiment, I'm just looking at this philosophically, to divorce it from the political debate that's going on at that time and pretend like I had no part in that, is, like you say, in that segment there, he is making that point that you have a responsibility in terms of what you put out and the context in which you put it out. And I'm glad he's seen the light, at least in the context of COVID. Maybe he should go back, and add another, 12 paragraphs of caveat that he had on his website. That's what he did ultimately. When people would go back to the Huffington Post piece that he had written, he put links back to his website that were ostensibly qualifiers for what he said, or explanations, clarifications, which was really more like a sales funnel, it looked like to me. Get people on my website and bring them in. But that's the Sam Harris way, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I just, when I heard that, I immediately, it was so similar to your critique of his kind of thinking that he could just talk about ideas in the ether without any context around them, and that it would have no bearing on the other debate that he was supposedly on the other side of, right? Supposedly, he says torture is bad and we shouldn't do it, right? But he's just like in the ether, able to talk about in public these things in a hypothetical scenario where maybe it makes sense to torture. I don't know how he could have said those words and not thought about your critique of him myself, but I don't know. Maybe he didn't. I don't know.
I think you underestimate his capacity to ignore and compartmentalize those things.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.